I would have one question, which is assuming that we have undertaken this analysis of the business model and understood what are the markets and the products and how the business model can evolve and become a more efficient business model, what does this analysis tell me in terms of the value chain? How do I bring it back to the strategy for supporting the development of the value chain?
Yeah, that is a very important question. And I think I can show the example of the two cases that we have with that regard. But it is clear, if you look at a value chain map, you see how the different types of enterprises are connected through business linkages. We have seen in the business model canvas that you have a value proposition, and you have supplying partners, and you have, of course, customers. So the business model canvas and the business model tells us something about those business linkages, the connections with those who are earlier, so to say, in the value chain sequence and those that come later in the process. So it means when we change the business model and the business model canvas, at that point, we'll also have to see how that business linkage is affected. So if it means we are investing into a production technology, then more raw material would probably be required to fill that capacity. If that is the business linkage to a supplier, then the supplier will also have to change in order to provide more. So in fact, the change in the business model has repercussions on other elements in the value chain, other operators in the value chain.
All right, I'm taking a question from the web platform from Laura Romo. She's asking what to do if the participants or the enterprises you are working with, if they don't want to share the critical information that we need.
Yeah, we are coming to this point. This is one of the critical points and limitations, and I will talk to this in chapter 5. So if you have a little patience, I'll pick that up later.
So we talked about that the financial viability is the most important factor, right? But at the same time, because we are sponsoring, or let's say we are supporting the business models or the participants of the value chain, and they have to ensure that certain social standards, certain environmental standards are also met, but these kind of standards normally don't have any financial implication on the business models, right? Mm-hmm. So how can we ensure that a financially viable value chain partner actually also adheres to these social and environmental standards? Or but actually the difficult case would be that you have a value chain partner who is adhering to the social and environmental and every other standard that we want them to, but they're not financially viable. Yeah. So that means they're doing good work, but they won't sustain.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like
that is a problem. If that is the case, you have a problem. Yeah. And you have a problem, of course, with your value chain development strategy, first of all. So I'm not saying that we are going to support any enterprise in whatever way. The whole work on value chain, the whole work on business model improvements builds on a strategy. So first, if you put it into a value chain context, first we have to know what is that value chain going for? How should it look like 5 years from now, for example? And satisfying the different sustainability dimensions. That's the whole idea of value chain development. So it's that context that needs to be clear before we move into specific solutions. We are talking here about a particular solution in the framework of a strategy that has thought through those considerations. And you're right. I mean, if we don't find such a strategy, if there's not enough interest in or not enough incentives, for that matter, to care for social and environmental concerns, then we better not move in the first place as a development agency. Or we would have to work on political framework conditions first before we can go to that next step. So, in fact, yes, there need to be some conditions met, and we should not jump into more profitable business models without having that considered beforehand.
Can I ask, is this related?
Yes, it's related. Yeah, thank you very much for that question, because I also had it on the back of my mind. We may apply these methodologies. It's often also not guaranteed that the companies we target are necessarily implementing all the legal requirements. And I think, I don't know if there is the space, but if that could be also considered to some extent here or expressed, I think it would help. It's natural for us here in Germany or most European Union countries, but the countries where we work, it's not that clear. Often you will see that the legislation is not the problem.
Yeah, true. I mean, I can only agree that we need to consider this. But let me also say one thing. We are not only talking about large companies here.
Absolutely.
We are also talking about the smallest micro enterprise you could think of, which also has a business model. I always like to quote the small cookie maker, yeah, a lady in West Africa that makes cookies in her own kitchen, and then she puts them in a small plastic bag and she walks to the roadside where the buses come by, and then they knock at the window and then they show you the cookies, hoping to make a few cents. Yeah. Now that is a market, that is a value proposition. There is a technology behind it because they have a kitchen at home. They have suppliers of the flour and whatever it needs, the charcoal maybe. Here is a customer relationship by knocking at the window. There is cost and revenue involved, and you make a profit, hopefully. That's the micro enterprise, and it also follows a business model. And now, what about the legal framework? Yeah, and does that micro enterprise observe standards? Probably not. But if we find that that is a source of income and of jobs, and we can improve her business, maybe leading her to utilize less charcoal and thus satisfying ecological sustainability issues and reducing cost, hopefully, then that would be a typical business model solution.
But I hope she would pay minimum wage if there is a legal minimum wage and she has employees.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. We have, of course, not only the business model solutions. I think Anna presented the overview of value links. And in fact, we are talking about 6 fields of solutions, and policy instruments are number 10. So we are now here into one of the solutions, and we have to understand that they are connected. So it is true, if you have a legal framework that doesn't give any incentives to sustainable development, we will have to work on that one. Therefore, I would think that business model solutions are not standalone solutions. Probably, in most cases, they will have to be combined with other solutions that are not the subject here, but in other modules of the methodology. Yeah, it is. Maybe we could come back to the overview, and then you'll see how there are different solutions. And in fact, maybe that is another general remark on value links. When we try to implement value chain development strategies, we are always going to utilize several solutions at the same time. So the business models never are standalone things.
You said that policy instruments is also part of the solution, but the whole time where you're talking about business models, you only focus in a way on the financial situation. So where does the analysis of the policy instruments come in? Does that go hand in hand in parallel, or is it beforehand, knowing in what kind of legal framework you're going to act in, or does it come afterwards? How exactly does that hand in hand look like?
Okay, maybe we have a little disadvantage here that we are not going through the whole methodology. If you go back to the slide that shows the overview of value links, you'll find that there is a module number 2 that is an analysis of value chains, and that includes an analysis also of important legal conditions under which that industry is operating. And then the strategy also refers to that analysis and tries to find an objective that is realistic and that can be done, can be achieved through interventions such as by GIZ programs. So that is something that is done beforehand. You first have an analysis and you have a strategic objective, and then you ask yourself now, what needs to change in the value chain so that we reach our objective? And what needs to change in the value chain are different things. It is the business model, what we are talking about now. It is business linkages. It is probably service. It is financing. It is adherence to quality management, probably industry-wide standards, and it is policy instruments. So you have different things that need to change in the value chain in order to reach the objective, the strategic objective of it. This is just one element. So we are focusing here on a particular solution and presuppose that the strategy has been thought through in order to satisfy objectives, such as the social and environmental objectives.
Okay, I'm taking a question from the web platform, which is a bit of a hands-on question. The team from Malawi is asking, first of all, can I use the business model, canvas, and tools to select partners that I want to work with? And if I'm using the business model analysis to identify my partners, what are sort of the minimum requirements I need to look at in order to make that selection? Or how do I do a quick and rough selection of my partners by looking at their business models?
Yeah, that's a very good proposition. I must say that that has not yet been done, to my knowledge, that we would use a business model analysis for selection of private partners. But I think, yes, it can and should be done. At least we should make sure that if we have a particular value chain strategy in which we say, okay, we are expanding the volume of production for the value chain at large, and that has to come, of course, from the enterprises that constitute the value chain. Now, who is able to invest and expand production? It can be the case that, in fact, that increase in volume, if that was the strategy, is not feasible in particular types of companies. And it would certainly be a good idea to find out who to partner with, who has the capacity to invest and increase production and volumes, and therefore contribute to the strategy. So here is again the relationship between the value chain and our strategy for developing it, and then how that translates at the level of individual firms. That relation needs to be made. Yeah, and the question is, how far do we go in making those analysis, and how much time does it take to really think that through? I would suggest that with the business model canvas, we have a tool that is applicable relatively easily, and that could, with little effort, perform that function to selecting partners. But I must say I haven't used it for that purpose so far.